Hey everyone, so today I'm just delighted to talk to my buddy Tom Schwab. Tom's a Navy veteran. He's one of the co-founders of Interview Valet, which is really cool. They put a lot of folks on my show and around the world on different podcast shows. He's the author of Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy. He is just a really, really nice guy. He's got a different approach than everybody else, and I am just delighted that I get to talk to Tom up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So what's up, Tom?
Hey, Phil, the only way it would be better is if both you and I were sitting there in Tampa right now.
Absolutely. That would be fun. We'd be having a beer. Actually, it's early in the morning, so we probably wouldn't be having beer, but we'd have a good cup of coffee and some great conversation just like we're going to have today. So,
I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. Me too, man. So what did you do in the Navy?
I ran nuclear power plants on an aircraft carrier. So I was blessed enough to go to the Naval Academy. I wasn't physically qualified. I have no depth perception, but they didn't figure that out until my senior year. So by that time, they're like, yeah, we've invested enough, or the taxpayers have invested enough money for you. So to all you U.S. taxpayers, thank you for paying for my education. But I was a mechanical engineer, then ran nuclear power plants in the Navy. And while I loved that, what it really taught me in life is that you can systematize any business. And when people start to say, well, you don't understand, my job is too unique, or my business is too tough. And I'm like, listen, right now, there are 20-year-old high school educated people that are running nuclear power plants. And they are motivated, they are well-trained, they are everything, but they can run a nuclear power plant. You can systematize your business. And really, it taught me that that's the way I look at life, right? Everything's a system to be optimized, to be perfected. I'm just not trying to make it up every time I go. It's not art. Figure it out.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. That makes so much sense when you think about if a 20-year-old can run a nuclear reactor, then why the heck can't a 40-year-old run a business?
I would say the reason is because there's no system in place and no guidelines. And sometimes we're all trying to reinvent the wheel. Yeah. As opposed to learning from what works in other industries. I call it cross-pollination. And the other thing too is everything we do with podcast interview marketing, I openly share. And when I put that book out, I had some people that told me I was crazy. It's like, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, why do the best chefs share their recipes? Why? Because some people will make the recipe. Other people go, well, that's neat, but I don't want to make the recipe. I just want to go to the restaurant. And that's the thing is personally, I'm a lousy chef. I know that you could give me the recipe and it would still taste bad. So I'm going to save time and money, and I'll just go there and get the results I want.
That's really smart. I think that's so interesting. And that's really what's changed, I think, in the world is used to be that information was scarce. And if you had the recipe, then you were the master and you controlled things. And now it's that you have to be the executioner. You have to be the person that does it. I mean, sure, there are still secret formulas like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and things like that. But for the most part, all recipes are open source now. So why do we resist that, Tom? Why do we not just embrace the fact that, yeah, everything is open source, but just because you're expecting, to coin the old Packer phrase, right, Forrest Gregg off tackle with the power sweep, it's coming. Yep. Why not just embrace that?
Well, I think it's a mindset thing, right? Do you see the world as a scarce place where I've got to fight for my share of the pie? Or do you see the world as an abundant place? And, for the vast majority of history, it's been a scarce place. Well, Mike Maples, who runs Sequoia Capital, I heard him on a podcast, and he was talking about the world is a world of abundance now, right? So there's more opportunity out there, more knowledge, more, you look at the obesity rate in the United States. It's a world of abundance. I mean, there's not a lack of calories out there. So the thing is that if you've got this abundant mentality, it's not, well, I'm trying to take a piece of pie from you. It's like, no, let's all just grow this pie from there. And I don't know, maybe it's, the way we were wired, just from fear and stuff like that, that if I give, that means I have less. but it's sort of that paradigm. The more you give, the more you'll get. Gary Vaynerchuk, talks about what is it? Jab, 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 right hook. And I might have missed a couple jabs in there. I just look at it as like, give, then ask. And often, you keep giving this information, and it's your ideal customers that come back and say, they're the ones that are asking, how can I work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, right? Gary coined that recently. Zig Ziglar talked about that 100 years ago, and you'll get everything you want in life as long as you give other people. I mean, that goes back as far back as the Bible and beyond that. And it's so interesting that still many resist that. And I think, in a lot of ways, if we can shift our mindset or help others, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I enjoy podcasting, is because it's an opportunity for me to share some abundant folks with people that are willing to share things. And a lot of times people are like, wow, I can't believe Tom said that. And for me, it's like, well, why wouldn't he share that? What's the hurt there? So when as you talk about podcasting, I mean, are those your perfect clients, those who understand that giving it away is really the best way to get it back?
Yes, but I would say even more, my ideal clients are the ones that understand what marketing is at its heart. I think today we're so enamored with the technology of, well, if I just had this app or this, if I was, number one on name your newest platform, that would change my business. And those are all tactics. And as we learned in the Navy, tactics always have an expiration date, right? The person that was number one in billboards in the 30s, was it Burma Shave or something?
Yeah.
Billboards don't work anymore. When banner ads had 100% click through, they don't do that anymore. So looking at, like, there's all kinds of different tactics, but what are you trying to do? And marketing at heart is starting a conversation with someone that could be an ideal customer. So how are you going to do it? And my best customers are like, yeah, I understand that. Okay. So knowing that you've got something to serve them with. They could be an author, speaker, coacher, emerging brand, software as a service company. How can you get that message to your ideal customer? And if they're still reading blogs might be a good way to go. If they're still looking at billboards, go with billboards. But for most people, it's like podcasting has shown that it's easy to do. You tell somebody, could you write a blog? That's homework. Could you be on a podcast interview? That's fun, right? So it's easy to do. It's powerful. It's evergreen. So to me, our best clients are the ones that understand what they're trying to do, understand that they're trying to connect with their ideal customers. And once again, that whole idea of abundance, that, I don't need everybody that hears me to come to my website. I was at a conference speaking one time, and somebody on the panel said, you need 70 leads a day. And I looked at it and said, I couldn't take care of 70 customers a day. And she's like, no, not 70 customers, just 70 new leads. And I'm like, why would I want leads if they wouldn't lead to customers? Right? So that whole idea of that, I think it's our best clients are the ones that understand why they're doing it. And then we can explain to them how podcast interview marketing works. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. One of our clients that we work with is the Cesari brothers. Most people have never even heard of them, but they've heard all the products that they worked on. OxyClean, George Foreman Grill, GoPro, all these things that were sold off of, the early ones, off of television commercials, infomercials. And those worked at the time. They came and we started talking about podcast interview marketing, and they're like, this is genius. This is the next one. So they understand what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I talked to Steve Cesari, and I would agree. I mean, he's certainly, he saw the infomercial rush and has realized that, there's a next phase of that. And a lot of that is absolutely podcasting. So I like the podcast because it's more intimate, because it's a one-to-one conversation that then somebody gets to eavesdrop in on and listen to and be part of that conversation. If they leave a comment or they offer some feedback, I always ask, what's the best way to offer feedback to connect with the guest as we go here. But what are some other reasons, Tom, that you've found that the power of the podcast to being on as an interviewer, or interviewee, not necessarily as your host, how is that so powerful?
And it is. And I feel guilty when podcasters ask me that question, because I'm afraid you're going to hit the end button right here. Honestly, Phil, you're doing all the work, right? Yep. So Anybody that says doing a podcast is easy has either never done it or never done it well. The great ones make it look easy. So Phil makes it look easy, but there's a lot of work that goes into that. So if you start talking about return on investment, you're not putting in, as a guest, you're not putting in a lot of time, effort, but you're getting the majority of the results, right? Phil's interviewing me. We're talking about me here, but he's doing all the work. So that's one thing. The other one is, people work with those they know, like, and trust, right? So nobody knows. The vast majority of people don't know me, right? So I come on, they have no idea who I am. But when the host introduces me, and vouches for me, that trust comes through with that. It's almost like, what's the difference between traffic from a cold source or a personal introduction? If we're at a party and you pull me over and say, this is Tom, you need to meet him, you need to talk with him, you need to hear what he says. What do you think the conversion rate is on that traffic? That's
pretty
really
high.
high.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're seeing that podcast interviews convert at 25 to 50% visitor to lead. A good blog will do 1 to 2% because it's really not cold traffic. And then there's so many other reasons too. It's like all the things that you don't think about, like, Phil, when you put this up, there's going to be a backlink to my site. Well, that's an SEO value from that. When you promote it to your audience on social media, and I'll do the same thing, there's that cross-pollination. So my audience may see Phil for the first time, but your audience may see Tom for the first time. So it's just a very, very powerful platform to get out there on.
Yeah, I agree. I like to be on both sides of the microphone. I like to, interview and to be interviewed. And I think, part of what works with that gets back to our first point of, you give first. You share your insights. You're not holding back. And I think that's so, so important. So for those that are listening and thinking, how do I get interviewed? How do I get on a show? How do I do that? So how do you, I know that you guys actually do that, but how do you, how's that process go?
Sure. And I'll give you the entire answer. It's too long. There's too many graphs and charts and downloads. So the book that Phil was nice enough to mention before, it's on Google. If you want to buy it on Google, Amazon, feel free to, but if you want a free copy of it, the digital copy, I'm happy to give that to everybody. Just go to interviewvalet.com/Phil, and anything we talk about will be there. So you get the Friends of Phil discount. Just download it. But really, it's not a secret, right? It's a system that goes behind that. And really, we've looked at podcast interview marketing as 6 steps, right? And it's just like baking a cake. If you lay out one of those 6 ingredients, it's probably not going to work out the same. So you've got to follow it along. And really, they all start with P, so even I can remember them. The first one is prospecting, finding the right shows. There's 400,000 shows out there, but not everyone is ideal for you. So, there's a whole system that goes behind how to do it. And once again, it's all there. The next one is pitching. How do you pitch the host to make it easy for them to say yes to you as a guest? And I'll give you a hint on this one. Put yourself in the host's shoes. It's not about you. It's about their audience. So when you reach out to them, tell them who you are and how you could help their audience. And the other thing there too is, think about it. Who likes cold pitches? Do cold pitches ever work?
Yeah.
No. So yes, and that's like spam. So if you want to get on any show, listen to 3 or 4 of the episodes. Make sure it's good for that, good for you. Then leave a rating and review. I guarantee you, every podcast host will read that rating and review. Reach out to them on social media, connect with them, share some of their stuff. You do that for 3 or 4 weeks. When you connect with the host, they'll know who you are, and it won't be a cold pitch. We did a study. It was the State of Podcast Interviews, and it was just released. To get on a podcast show, if it's brand new, 0 to 500 listeners, they'll say yes to 2/3 of the cold pitches, right? They're new, they need people. It drops down drastically. By the time they get to 1,000 downloads, you've got like a 20% chance. By the time it's 50,000 downloads, you've got less than a 1% chance on a cold pitch. So you're wasting your time. So we've gone through, there was the prospecting, the pitching, preparation. Before you go on a show, make sure you're prepared. You know what the show is about. The host, make it easy for them to know what you're about. Then you've got the performance. That's the one thing you can't outsource. But during the show, to make sure that you talk about things back at your website. Right? So I'm going to pull the curtain back. That's what you heard me do when I said, hey, if you want a copy of the book, just go to interviewvalet.com/Phil. I mean, it's a subtle call to action, but the whole idea is to move people along in that. And then the final step is really the promotion. This is evergreen content. We're recording this in 2017, but I guarantee you there's somebody in 2020 right now that is listening to it for the first time, and they're like, this is awesome. So make sure you promote that content on social media. And if you do that, it makes it a whole lot easier for the podcast host to say yes also, because they want their message spread too.
Yeah, great system there. I think the one that most miss is the last one. First of all, I see a lot of times people think that by coming on a show, they're doing the host a solid by coming on the show. And while that's great, when it's a 0 to 500 show, once you get some more, I mean, you're really being done the favor. That's the one that I see the most missed. And then the second one that I see missed is actually that preparation of, so who's your audience? Who talks to you? And sometimes that's simply because, like my show is more variety, but I focus on, on the salesperson, on the person who could be interviewed, on the person who has a little bit more talent, who can perform, who can do things. But if you're not sure, look at who the guests are. And often you'll see who they talk to, who they're engaged with. So if you're not sure, a little more preparation certainly will help that.
And there's nothing that will ruin your credibility quicker, Phil. And you know this, than not being prepared for it. It's like the performer that walks out on the stage in Cleveland and says, "Hello, Cincinnati." You just made a hostile crowd out of that. Or if you get on the podcast and there's a question they always ask of every guest, and you go, I've never thought about that. What you just told to the audience is, I have never listened to this podcast. I'm not one of you. So do the preparation beforehand. And often I tell people, and this was part of the study also, and I'll put the link to the study on that page also, asking people how much they prepared for an interview, and we could correlate how much they prepared to whether or not the interview met their expectations, right? So would you walk on stage in front of 10,000 people for a presentation and just say, I'm going to wing it. I'll just walk out there and wing it?
No, not a chance.
Not a chance. And I don't think there's anybody in the world that would say, yeah, I do that. But that podcast is going to be heard by tens of thousands of people. And there's a lot of people that go, I've been on a lot of podcasts. I'll just wing it. Good luck. Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's not going to work. I mean, you have to do some preparation. You should be ready for the questions. As you said, I would say 3 to 5. And that's where, if you don't have the time, you can certainly work with someone like Tom at Interview Valet. I mean, that's his team. I know they do a fantastic job, because when I get pitched someone, it's clear that they've listened to the past feedback that I've given to find out who I really want to talk to, who my audience is, and keep refining. I have to say, Tom, really, you should give Terry a big high five, because she does a great job of being relevant, persistent, and yet not a pain in my butt, which is really, I think those are the 3 things that you really need to be in order to be effective at outreach.
Well, very much so. And the other thing too is that if you're just pitching yourself, it's a one-time thing, right? So I reach out to Phil, but that's, what am I going to do? Pitch myself every week? Whereas Terry's got a relationship with you. She knows what you like, what guests, all the rest of that. So, the close rate from yeses or pitches to yeses for us, it's obscenely high. But I look at that with pride, because we're not pitching people that the host wouldn't say yes to. So you get that reputation there. And then also in that preparation, I think it's important to learn from other people. Remember, in the military, we had checklists for everything. I mean, you couldn't do anything that wasn't a checklist. And checklists were written in blood because somebody else had made that mistake. And it's easier to learn from somebody else's mistakes than yours. And so here's another one. I'll put this resource on. I've got a checklist that we give to all of our clients that I use before every interview. And I would have to say that most of the blood on that checklist is mine. Um, but it's not wrong to make a mistake, but to make a mistake the second time or that somebody else told you about, that's stupid. So little things like I'll put this at interviewvalet.com/Phil. So it'll be there. Like turning off your Dropbox. I was on a podcast interview one time, and somebody on my staff had asked me or sent me a video that I had been asking for a while, but it was the worst timing. We're in the middle of this call, bandwidth is great, and all of a sudden it disappears. And then all of a sudden I see, oh, I didn't pause the Dropbox. And now this great interview is competing with bandwidth for that. So, there's all kinds of those little things that you can just go through 5 minutes before the interview and check. All of those are there. You don't forget them because, you got one chance to be on this stage. You don't want to mess that up. So once again, that's part of the preparation that we do for all guests.
Yeah. And it definitely shows. Your guests definitely are prepared, and I appreciate that. And I know the people that are listening certainly appreciate that because the conversation is cleaner. There's nothing dinking around and you don't have distractions. We had a webinar yesterday with Vengresso, and, one of the things that I told him, is pause Dropbox and pause Google Drive. Always pause them. If you don't know how to pause them, close them. Close the app. I'd rather that than have it drop. And yeah, we see that. Unfortunately, people don't pay attention to that. And then you wonder why the bandwidth goes bloop right in the toilet. And bad noise, bad sound is the number one cause of people killing your podcast.
And assumptions. Making assumptions. Well, I thought my microphone was connected. One of my early interviews, that was a big one. I was thrilled to be there. I got through with the entire interview. And at the end, the host goes, what kind of microphone are you using? And I told him, and he's like, wow, it didn't sound like that. And I went into my settings, and I had rebooted my computer beforehand. I always do that before an interview. And it had picked up the wrong microphone. So I'm talking into a $400 microphone and getting picked up by the internal microphone. It sounded like I was calling in from a bathroom. And things like that will ruin your credibility. So from that, we make sure that, that we help our clients and help really anybody, because this is a stage. This, the most valuable thing that you have is your time. Don't go on a 45-minute interview and not get results out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And having that resource page specific for the interviewer is another great thing that you guys do. You do a great job of that. What are some of the things that belong on that gift or resource page that you mentioned at, interviewvalet.com/Phil? Okay.
This is great because it totally pulling behind the curtain. And, I always say, I've got an opinion, Phil, you've got an opinion, and that's all they are. The customers will tell you what they love and what they loathe. And you just got to, like in the Navy, you got to be smart enough to do right or to know right answer when told. So we've always tested this and refined it. That's why we know that put 3 offers on there at least. The other thing is, like, this is video, but if somebody is just listening to this, they've never seen Tom, they've never seen my website. So when that pops up, the first thing they're going to see is the Conversations with Phil logo, right? It's a trust seal. And we tested this, and that trust seal increases conversions by 30%. It's almost like a tacit endorsement, right? Whereas if they just came and they weren't quite sure what the page was, especially on mobile, am I in the right place? The most common button hit on a computer is the back button. You don't want them to hit that. The other thing is that it's not a landing page, right? If you come to my site, I'm not going to force you fill out this form or leave. No. If you want to look around, look at the free resources, learn more, that's fine. So it's more of a custom homepage, right? So like I said, we're talking in 2017 here. If somebody comes in 2020, I guarantee you my homepage is going to change by then. So if I talked about different offers on the homepage and they come there and it's not the same, they're going to bounce. So what they're going to see there is they're going to see their friend's picture, right? They're going to see Phil's picture, the logo. Then they're going to see a greeting to them, It'll be something like, if you're on this page, it's because you heard Phil and I talking on the Conversations with Phil podcast, right? Recognizing their friend. I hope you had as much fun listening to the podcast as I did talking with Phil. He's passionate about this. I'm passionate about this. A little bit of copy, right? To summarize what we were doing there. My picture, because for some podcasts, if they don't, they just want to see who's the funny face behind that voice. And then just at the bottom, different calls to action. And what we try to do is, and our testing has proved this, works best, is give them 3 ways to say yes. A small yes, a medium yes, and a heck yes. So if somebody wants to engage with you, if they come with credit card in hand, don't make them go through a funnel, right? Give them the opportunity there. But the flip side too is if your only call to action is come to my website, sign up for this program, buy something, not everybody's there. So give them other opportunities to go there. So give them a small, medium, and large yes to interact with. And then the other thing is always put the social media on there and the email. I hate that when people get to an end of a podcast and they say, well, Tom, how can people get in touch with you? And they start like reciting off their Twitter and their LinkedIn and their email address. I'm running. Well, I'm jogging while I'm listening to most podcasts. I don't have time to write all this stuff down. Make it easy for me. So that's what you're going to see. And I was going to say, if for nothing else, if you just want to see what your welcome page should look like, just go to interviewvalet.com/Phil and copy and paste. Just make sure you change the picture from me to you, because everybody will think you're an old white guy with way too much gray hair.
And you'll have the wrong resources to give away too.
That's right, but they can connect with me on social media then.
Awesome. Well, you gave us a ton of value, Tom. Is there any one thing that maybe I didn't ask that you'd like to make sure that you impart on people that are listening in today to Conversation with Phil?
Phil, I think the one thing that I would point out to everybody is what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. So you may think, well, what would I talk about on a podcast? You've got expertise, you've got background, you've got an opinion that is totally different than other people's. If you have been in your industry, you're an expert in that. Now, you might not be the number one undisputed expert, but if you look at the legal definition of an expert, it's somebody that, by their training, their background, by their experience, has more knowledge than the average person. And really, you're not doing any good if you just hold that knowledge inside you. You can go out there and share it with other people. Finally, if you're listening to podcasts, you know how powerful this medium is. You know that in the future, your ideal customers are going to be listening to it. And the only question is, are they going to be listening to you or your competitor? That's a decision you can make, and you can do it as a podcast host, a podcast guest, or both. But for heaven's sake, share what you know with the world.
Yeah, great advice, Tom. Share what you know with the world. So this is my buddy, Tom Schwab. You go to interviewvalet.com/Phil. You're going to pick up all of his stuff. I'm not going to bore you by reading all of his social media, but I do want to encourage you folks, reach out to Tom, learn from his stuff. His stuff works. His people are professional. They're helpful. His insights are right on the money. I've been podcasting a long time. His folks are the most prepared. So I encourage you to learn from Tom, get a piece of his insight, and get smarter with Interview Valet. So thank you so much, Tom. This is fun, man.
Thank you, Phil.